Okay, so this is Radeon Adrenaline. One of the cool features that we now have access to is what's called, fluid motion frames or frame generation. I'm going to share with you some scientific data. Now, I want this to be a comprehensive test, so I've set up three different games. I've set up Deadlock, which will act as our shooting game, and we will do a basic test of how it feels to shoot at this moving object, right? This is us trying to check out our aim and feel at different frames per second and frame generation. The next game is going to be Taken, basic Tekken, because we're going to test out how it feels to play a fighting game at different frame rates as well. And then last but definitely not least, we have MotoGP 2022 standing in for racing games. It's going to be pretty cool. We'll start from 30 frames per second. At 30 FPS, I can barely up 143 damage. I'm really struggling to track it. Okay, I'm really struggling to track. 30 FPS, it's pretty terrible, no lie. The fighting game standing. And let me tell you, so Tekken actually calculates all of its moves at 60 FPS. So us running that game at 30 FPS is actually pretty terrible for us. Like, look, it's basically moving in slow motion. Okay, I can tell you this. I feel like I feel like I'm playing on a PlayStation 1 at 30 FPS. Even this game feels, yeah, it feels pretty terrible. It feels pretty terrible, but let me go and drive into the first corner and see if I can get my braking distances correct. And brake. Yeah, no. Yeah, 30 FPS, basically unplayable. But now let's quickly redo those tests with frame generation. So when you're rasterizing, when you're rendering frames out, it will be a constant 66 milliseconds between every frame. However, when you're generating a frame, you need these two frames in order to create the generated frame. It's an estimation in between. So what it would look like in reality is that frame over there is now right here. And because it takes a certain amount of time to generate the frame, let's say 10 milliseconds, there's that. Back to Adrenaline, head over to Deadlock. It's already set up at 30 frames per second, which is cool. Then turn on fluid motion frames. So now let me head over to performance. All right, we're now running at 60 FPS with frame gen lag. And let me tell you, shooting and tracking in these conditions is practically impossible. I'm just behind the moving mannequin. Okay, I'm going to put the screen cap, but even though the motion is looking smooth, you can see a lot of weird artifacts from the frame generation, and the frame generation lag is 18 frames per second. But honestly, considering this game isn't even built around 30 FPS, anything below 60 it starts to have issues. Yeah, we're going to pretty much call this an absolute fail. So 30 FPS with frame gen. Honestly, 30 FPS in general is just rather terrible. Now this is the general data at 30 frames per second. We have an input latency of 33 milliseconds. When we generate it up to 60, we get a frame gen latency of 18, which means the total latency is 51. That means from the moment that you press any button, it's 51 milliseconds before you actually get the visual feedback. Now, just for clarity, now by getting the total latency and dividing 1000 by, that means if you're playing at 30 FPS and you frame gen, you're actually going to feel, I'm calling this the feel FPS in the buttons. It's going to feel like you're playing at basically 20 FPS. Now let me tell you, Deadlock at 60 FPS, now I can actually stand still and just land, generally follow and land my shots. It's not too bad. It's not the smoothest thing in the world, but I think here games start being playable. Now for Tekken, this is a lot better. It's now actually doing things. Okay, combos can even be landed. Okay, yeah, much better, much better. Okay, so this game is designed to be played at 60 FPS on consoles and PC, so it's not a surprise that at 60 FPS it feels good. See, around this first corner at 60 frames per second, braking early. Yeah, I actually made the corner because I have the brake feel. Alright, now for some reason Deadlock has refused to frame gen. So this is HyperDev in post. Basically Deadlock refused to frame generate for some reason. Tekken did frame generate, but frame gen at 60 felt good and felt okay, but that's probably due to the game's internal. Now I also tried out generating to 120 FPS from 60, and I'll put the numbers of latency on screen. So essentially you are going to be getting 60 FPS generating to 120 FPS, but you are getting the feel FPS of 37. So not much better than 30 FPS, which is really not that great. There are some bigger numbers that I got later. So it turns out that the ideal FPS for FrameGen starts at about 120, and the reason why it starts from about 120 is because there you're able to get FrameGen latencies that are below about 7 milliseconds. So at 120 you will feel like you're playing the game at about 70 FPS. At 144 you feel like you're playing at 83. At 180 you're frame genning all the way up to 360 FPS for great smooth motion, but you're going to feel like you're playing at 100 FPS. But I think feeling like you're playing at 100 FPS is not too bad. The crazy thing is, at frame rates of 240, frame genning to 480 FPS for people with big fast monitor energy of 480 Hz, you actually get a frame gen latency of just 3 ms, so you feel like you're playing at 139 FPS, 140 FPS, which is not too bad. So those are the results of the testing. Do with that what you will, but please, as game developers, our primary job should be to give players a great base frame rate, because to really enjoy frame gen you need a great base frame rate. Okay, yeah, that's pretty much it.